Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
At last, there is clear blue water between the Labour and Conservative parties as the Labour Party hits back after Rishi Sunak's net zero statement yesterday. We'll ask how the Labour Party got themselves into the right place. We'll talk Lampedusa. We'll talk to the Red Cross. We'll also talk to a European politician and an immigration rights lawyer. There are now calls in Poland and elsewhere to call a complete halt to what is going on in the Mediterranean. And joining me on Talking Pints, he's the old Etonian who planned a coup in Equatorial Guinea. No, Simon Mann's story really is true. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. Well, the Bank of England has left its interest rate unchanged at 5.25%. Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan has more.
After 14 successive rate rises from 0.1% at the end of 2001 all the way up to 5.25%, the Bank of England has finally decided enough is enough, and inflation is now coming down, and there's no need, for now at least, to raise rates anymore. This will be a huge relief to young families with variable rate mortgages. It will be a huge relief to companies with variable rate loans. It will be a huge relief to many consumers across the country.
Liam Halligan there. Well, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said, despite the bank's decision, Britain is worse off under the Conservatives.
I think there will be a sense of relief, particularly for those who are coming up to the end of their mortgage deals. But let's look at where we are in the bigger picture, because somebody coming up to remortgage their house today is looking at paying £220 more a month than they would have done if they had have remortgaged a year ago. So this is still a very challenging time for families and businesses with the cost of living crisis, which continues to bite.
Well, borrowers may start to feel the benefits of the Bank of England's announcement. Shortly after it was made, Nationwide said it'll be cutting the majority of its fixed-rate mortgages, the country's biggest building society saying they'll now offer 5- and 10-year fixed-rate mortgages of below 5% for first-time buyers and home movers. Away from the economy, the Prime Minister says hard-pressed families shouldn't have to pay an unaffordable price for the UK to reach net zero. But Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation Sarah Jones said the government's plan to roll back some climate policies is the wrong decision. Rishi Sunak hit back, saying he won't proceed with plans that would punish motorists and working people.
We've been through the numbers and we're absolutely confident that we are on track to hit all our international and domestic targets, which, by the way, are world leading. And the reason I have confidence in that is because we've over-delivered on all of our carbon budgets to date. Despite everyone saying, oh, you might not hit them, we've over-delivered on them. Plus, we can see that the costs of some of these new technologies are falling far faster than people had predicted. Offshore wind is a great example of that. Cost today 70% less than we predicted in 2016.
And lastly, the King has paid tribute to what he's called the indispensable working relationship between the United Kingdom and France on the second day of his visit there. His Majesty and Queen Camilla spent the afternoon visiting a flower market despite the rain before heading to Notre Dame Cathedral. And earlier, he became the first British monarch to speak from the Senate chamber in Paris. And he celebrated the friendship and warm familiarity between the two nations, as well as unity on issues like climate change. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, we now have a choice. A gap in British politics. Thank goodness for that, because for the last 6 months I've been thinking we'll have a general election between Tweedledum and Tweedledee and there'll be no policy differences whatsoever. But Ed Miliband, yes, he's back absolutely in a very prominent position, saying that if Labour come to power, they will bring back the 2030 deadline, after which you won't be able to buy a new car that is petrol or diesel. And they're saying they do not agree with the extension out until 2035 for gas and oil boilers. Now, I've no doubt we'll hear much more from the Labour Party at their conference, but it's a clear piece of policy positioning. I have to say myself, I thought that the relaxation on people who use oil for their boilers was very necessary, because there are 1.7 million people living off-grid, mostly out there in rural England, many of them pensioners, living in bungalows, for whom the idea that they wouldn't be able to replace their oil tank, their oil burner, they'd have to get a heat pump, which would still cost them a huge amount of money and be highly inappropriate. I think that was actually one of the best things that was done yesterday. But Labour have set out their stall. What does all of that mean for the red wall vote? And we went through the polling last night. We sat here, and it was clear that 2019 voters, a good solid two-thirds of them, thought Sunak was right. So have Labour positioned this correctly? Have Labour got this right? Give me your thoughts, please. Farage at gbnews.com. Joining me, Matthew Lazar, former head of broadcasting at the Labour Party, and Ed Miliband advisor, and now with Policy Network. Well, I think both of us are quite refreshed to see
absolutely.
Actually a debate going
I know,
on.
you're absolutely right, Nigel. I mean, it's good to see a proper debate about policy and not about slices of cake or curries or you know what.
Or beers.
or beers, anything.
No. Now, this is interesting, because Professor Goodwin sat where you are last night with a piece of exclusive polling, and it made it clear that the comfortable urban middle classes, suburbia, they actually rather like their electric cars, and they can afford a new one, and it's not really a problem at all, and they think the government should stick to the original net zero targets. But when you get out into working class voters, when you get out in particular to that group of voters, the ones that left the Labour Party, a lot of them came through me.
Yes, absolutely.
On to Boris Johnson. And you think about them, you think about older people, you think about people on low incomes. You know, they've been really scared about many of the implications of net zero, and it's a debate that's gathered steam. despite very little political debate in Parliament over it. And I just wonder, from a Labour perspective, has Ed Miliband put them in the right place today?
Well, I think that they've been very careful today to sort of try and have their cake and eat it by being clear on the car target. They're slightly fudging it on the boilers. They'll be discussing that.
It's vague.
It's vague because they'll be discussing that behind closed doors now, because that's where the political worry is. Because let's remind ourselves, on cars, this is about people buying new cars. This isn't asking anybody to change anything. It's not asking anybody to go out and spend money to force people to do something they don't want. It's just forcing them to maybe spend their money on something they don't want, but it's slightly different. The background to all this, of course, is ULEZ, as we know, which is really, really worrying the Labour Party, because what should have been a slam dunk in terms of the London mayoral election is now a real challenge and a nightmare. Nobody would have thought a year ago that Labour's biggest worry politically would be the London mayoral elections next May.
Yeah, things change.
Absolutely, they certainly do. So as far as the Red Wall's concerned, yes, Labour generally on the environment has to travel a very careful path between its two different interest groups, as it were. We've seen that with oil and gas recently, where the policy had to be if you're cynical, you call it a fudge. You might call it a sensible compromise if you weren't, between what the trade unions want, which is to say yes to all oil and gas, and what the environmental lobby and many of those voters you're talking about want, which is to stop all oil and gas exploration. And a similar debate will be going on today in Keir's office about this.
It's funny, isn't it? You know, working class voters actually want all this stuff relaxed or got rid of completely. Middle class voters quite like all this net zero stuff. The trade unions actually think what Rishi's done is the right thing. Some of the giant global corporates take the opposite view. I mean, left and right politics.
Well, I would say I'd slightly sort of, but I slightly disagree, Nigel, just on the thing. I think the difference is that on the boilers issue, the boilers is about forcing people, when their boiler breaks down, to buy an expensive system, which at the moment we don't think works as effectively in most cases. It does in some cases, but not in most cases, as the existing thing. That's a big political nightmare. We've seen it in Germany, where the coalition in Germany is almost at a collapsing point on this very issue. And there, effectively, you've got two parties representing those two interests in the Greens and in the SPD with more traditional voters. But on the unions want to keep electric and to build electric vehicle jobs in Britain, so they will be backing this sort of people like manufacturing made in the UK.
Well, yes, I mean, that's true, but equally the unions are quite happy to build petrol and diesel cars for a few more.
They will, but I think that the unions, like most of the industry, think that the EV is the future and they want to keep it in the global game. But I can tell you that the people, and we're really worried about those Red Wall voters. Remember, 40% of people in the lowest economic groups don't have access to a car, so the one of those two that they're worried about is the boilers. So you can absolutely predict that Labour will not go back to what the Tories were saying 2 days ago about boilers.
I seriously question that figure. Maybe 40% of those that live in big cities.
Well, that's meant to be the figure across the UK. It's 80% in the big cities.
I struggle with that, because actually, if you live outside the big cities, a car is a necessity.
But sometimes there's only one in the family, not two, so that does have an impact.
Now, Montreal. The conference in Montreal.
Absolutely. I'm with you, Nigel, not in Montreal. I used to organise this conference with good old Justin. I've got a great selection of photos of me and Justin in his selection of jazzy jackets. But there was more serious content this week.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer basically saying we mustn't diverge from Europe because unless we stay with EU law, we'll lower standards. It's almost as if Keir Starmer is saying everything that comes from Europe is wonderful. We're not capable of making environmental law ourselves. This really was Remain a talk, or even almost rejoin a talk.
Well, I think there's no question of rejoining. However much in his heart Keir may want to, his head will certainly rule that out. And they're absolutely clear that the manifesto will commit to not rejoining because it would be political suicide otherwise. This is exactly the political divide that we were just talking about over the environment. It's exactly the same political divide. There's huge pressure, of course, within the party as well, where 90% plus of members voted to remain. In fact, probably higher than that now. The sort of left levers have left alongside Corbyn. So there's huge political pressure. He's trying to walk a tightrope. I think he needs to be very careful on his language, because the Tories are going to weaponise. These are the two things they want to weaponise most in the Red Wall. They're going to want to weaponise the environment and the green pledges, and they want to weaponise Europe. So there is no rejoining. If they want to have a closer relationship, they need to find a form of words that sort of outlines it. Which is not. Well, I don't think they want to go that far at all. I don't think they want to be talking about membership as a word in any sense.
If you stay aligned, it's still Brino, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is.
Name only.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, what they need to do is be clear what they want and be clear if there are benefits from having a closer trade relationship. But at the moment, the language, I think, is is difficult because, I mean, you will remember this. Tony Blair used to give lots of lovely speeches saying how pro-European he was, but he never gave them in Britain. He always used to go abroad. And I think the optics, as somebody who used to organise that conference, and I know that backdrop well, I probably wouldn't have been talking about it amidst, in Montreal, amidst, with Justin Trudeau and that sort of forum. He should be in Darlington if he's going to be talking about this, saying it's because of jobs in electric vehicles that I want to do this, X, Y and Z. So the messaging needs to be better.
2024 just got a whole load more interesting.
It certainly has.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed.
Nigel.
In a moment, we'll talk Lampedusa, we'll begin with the Red Cross and then debate. Are some of the calls that are now coming from European countries saying we must put a complete halt to what is happening in the Mediterranean? Is that the right call? Is it politically possible?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I said on Monday I thought Lampedusa could become the most important political issue within the European Union and that it had the potential to perhaps destroy it. Maybe that was strong language, but I don't believe I was wrong for a moment. Think about it. That island of 6,000 people and somewhere between 2 and 3 times the size of the population of the island have arrived in the last 10 days on boats, leading, of course, initially to a huge problem in how to look after these people, many of them not respecting any compounds they were supposed to be in, the beginnings of transportations to the Italian mainland. But the real story is this. The real story is there are political parties around Europe that are now saying, enough. We went through all of this back in 2015 and 16, and it did in some cases, like Sweden, have very severe social consequences. Even the president of Germany, Steinmeier, saying overnight, we've reached our limit. We just can't take any more. Well, Poland is a pretty key player in all of this. And they're going to have a general election next month. And interestingly, Dominik Tarczyński, MEP, was the first MEP to go and visit Lampedusa. And he joins me right now, member of the European Parliament for the Law and Justice Party. Dominic, your position on this would be just what? I mean, are Poland going to say, if your party wins the general election,
right,
and it looks like you're close to winning the general election, if your party wins the general election, are you saying you won't take migrants that have come in through Italy?
Of course not. We won't. What we're saying is send them back.
OK.
Simple as that. Poland is the only country in the European Union which we haven't had even one terrorist attack. We don't have stabbings, we don't have rapes, we don't have all these really dangerous behaviors from migrants, illegal migrants. So our policy is very straight, zero tolerance. We built a beautiful wall on our border with Belarus, and there's no way anyone would enter Poland. When you see the data from Eurostat, not ours, from European Union, Poland is the safest country in Europe.
That is true. That is true. Many would say that, well, OK, there have been problems of assimilation, but that in time it's going to be a success. And and here's the interesting thing. You know, your signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights.
That's right.
You're subject to that court in Strasbourg. How is it that the European Union aren't taking action against you for saying that?
Of course they will. They started in 2015. You have to remember when they started this madness, I mean, Angela Merkel started it when she was looking for cheap labor. We said, no, we're not going to sign this quota system. And the quota system failed. The quota system does not exist anymore. Why? Because Poland and others said, Hungary...
No, you simply said no.
No.
And you're still saying no.
No, we said very simple, zero. Not 1,000, not 100, zero, not even
whilst
one.
I'm talking to Dominic, we'll play you some footage of him on the island of Lampedusa. So zero it was, zero it's going to remain.
That's right.
And what is going to happen, do you think, outside of Poland? I mean, we had a very strong woman elected almost exactly a year ago as the Prime Minister of Italy.
Right.
Basically saying, we're not going to put up with this. We're going to stop this. And there she was begging Ursula von der Leyen to help her.
Well, the problem is with Italy, I think the problem is just very simple. Money. The budget is in really bad shape. So they have really serious problems. And she needs money from European Union. She needs money for existence at the moment. The economy is not doing very well. It's differently in Poland. Poland is doing great. The lowest unemployment in the whole European Union.
Your economy is good. Some of those pictures we just showed our viewers, that number of young men packed in...
18,000.
Must have been quite a tense atmosphere.
That was scary, I must say. That was really scary, especially that we visited this camp during the night. And, you know, I did not expect many...
Look at it.
Yeah, 18,000 people within a week, and the camp was prepared for 400 people.
Yeah.
And this madness has to be stopped. It will be stopped by Poland. We stopped it. We never let anyone to come illegally to Poland. When you see Polish people in London, we are here legally. We pay taxes, we contribute to the society, and if anyone would like to come to Poland legally, you are very welcome. But the problem is, when you have 200,000 people in Germany, we do not know who are they. They just vanished. 200,000 people by the German data. We don't know who are they, where are they, what are they going to do.
Dominic, we have our own problem, you know, with 46,000 people crossing the English Channel last year. What do you say, send them back? How would you send those young men back? I mean, you'd need the army to do it, wouldn't you?
No, not at all. What you need to do, you need to put them on the plane, send them back. The problem is that they destroy their passports, they destroy their fingerprints, so they are already criminals. But you cannot keep them. You cannot let them stay in here, because if we're going to continue with this madness, there will be 5 or 15 or 50 million people within 10 years. It's not going to stop because people who are making money on it are very happy from what they heard from Madame von der Leyen.
And they're making a lot of money. Now, I'm joined down the line by Fadi Farhat, senior legal consultant and a lawyer specialising in immigration and human rights law. Fadi, when you hear the view from a Polish politician, and, you know, they're on the verge of winning a majority at the next election, how would you respond to the idea that the only way we stop this is to simply send people back across the Mediterranean?
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for having me. Well, in terms of the response from a lawyer's point of view, as a lawyer, you can comment on the existing state of the law and the existing state of the legal framework which we have, which across Europe is shaped by the European Convention on Human Rights and the ECHR. Of course, the old saying is, if there's a will, there's a way. So that's in the political ambit, and with a majority in Poland, one can say that there is a political mandate for Mr. Kaczynski's ideas and policies. But in terms of the current legal framework, the European Court in Strasbourg has been clear that in its previous case law, one called Hersey Jama is probably the most famous one, is that these policies of interception, even on the high seas in international waters, fall foul of the Refugee Convention and Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So there is jurisprudentially, in terms of the legal principles, a legal barrier there. How you overcome those legal barriers is a question of political will, and there's no doubt going to be a collision between where the current legal framework will collide with any new political mandate, such as that put forward by Mr. Kaczynski's party. But in terms of the current legal framework, it would seem to be unfeasible.
So if for example, Germany, France, the European Commission said, we need to change that legal framework, they could do that, couldn't they?
They could, subject to the issue that, strictly speaking, the European Convention on Human Rights comes through one's membership of the Council of Europe, which is a separate organization to the European Union and the European Commission. But it's presently, a condition of European Union membership to be also a member of the Council of Europe. So there are sort of interlocking issues at play. But of course, politically, if there's enough political will and the political consensus across the board, anything is possible in theory. But there are presently legal barriers to that.
Dominic, you've heard what Fadi said. I think he's absolutely right, by the way. He's absolutely right in what he says.
I'm happy he mentioned the legal ground, because I'm a lawyer too. I'm doing my PhD on human rights at the moment. And the most important message from our government is that there is no law, any law, above the will of Polish nation. That's why we have elections in 25 days, but we have referendum the same day. And we just let Polish people to say, do you want illegal migration, which is forced by European Union, yes or no? So if Polish nation will say again, and I must say, since 2015, our party won 8 times. We have won 8 times. Leftists were rejected 8 times. If we're going to win, if referendum will be very, very clear, there is no law above the will of Polish nation. And the most important is safety. We want our women, our children to be safe, and we're going to keep our word. We promised in 2015, 0. Not even one will come to Poland. We did not let anyone in illegally, and we're going to keep our word.
Dominic, that language used in this country would be written off.
Well, we've been called by. Listen, we've been
and we'd be told we kicked out of the European Union.
We've been called by Jean-Claude Juncker a racist.
I know.
They can call us a pink elephant. I don't care.
I'm going to give the last word to Fadi. Fadi, you hear the determination. You hear a different narrative to one that you would hear in Scandinavia or at the moment in France or Germany. It sounds like these guys are on a major collision course, doesn't it?
Yes, Nigel. And it seems Dominic's outlining the principle that Parliament is sovereign and Parliament ultimately has the final word. That's one view. The other view is, of course, Parliament can only be sovereign to a certain extent because we have a supranational system. By supranational, we have a governing framework where inevitably there's going to be a collision between that supranational framework and parliamentary sovereignty at a local level.
Well, I sense a major conflict is coming in the next couple of years. Fuddy, Dominic, both of you, thank you very much indeed for joining me. In a moment, I'll be joined by Sharon Davis, the former Olympic swimmer and campaigner, and some recent polling suggests our relaxed attitudes towards transgender people has changed significantly. I'm also going to talk to the former Attorney General of Arizona about the American legal system, because from this side of the pond, it looks pretty crazy.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel. Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's a big day in global media. Rupert Murdoch, the 92-year-old Rupert Murdoch with a 70-year career in media, has announced today that he's stepping down as the head of Fox News and indeed as the chairman of News Corp. He becomes emeritus chair, but that's a very different thing. This guy has been incredible, seen by many to be divisive. Someone that I've interacted with and for a brief period of time did some work for. He has been, honestly, one of the most successful media barons in history. And he'll leave an enormous gap. From our perspective in this country, And we think of the Sun newspaper and how dominant and powerful it was back in general elections. We perhaps think also of Fox News and how powerful and profitable that's been in America. But the one thing to remember about Rupert Murdoch, and I doubt you'll hear this from any other commentator because they probably don't understand it, is this. In the run-up to the 97 election, John Major was in big trouble. Big trouble politically and big trouble with a growing Eurosceptic voice. Because of Jimmy Goldsmith's referendum party, Major promised a referendum before we joined the euro. But Blair was clearly going to win the election. But Blair wanted Murdoch's support. He wanted the Sun newspaper to back him. And the price that Rupert demanded was, yes, we'll back you, but you have to promise there'll be a referendum before we join the euro. And Blair did the deal. If that hadn't happened, we would have gone straight into the euro in phase one. Brexit would not have happened. So I am very, very grateful to Rupert Murdoch, the man who did more than anybody to save the pound. Now I'm joined by a friend of the show, Mark Brnovich, former Arizona Attorney General. Mark, what is going on legally in America is continually in our news. We learned today that on October the 3rd, Hunter Biden will appear in a court in Delaware on firearms charges, getting a gun whilst he was still a drug user, drug addict. Seems to me that given some of the accusations that were made against Hunter Biden, these are relatively minor charges.
They are and they aren't. I mean, they're significant in the sense that he could face up to 10 years in prison for each of the firearms charges. And I know as a former federal prosecutor, the big thing they get you with, whether it's lying to the FBI or lying on these federal forums, I mean, that's a felony in the United States. And so it's funny because the left and the Democrats do everything they can to try to prevent people from owning guns in the United States. They want more gun restrictions, and they advocate more laws like this that punish people. And so now it's they're getting hoisted on their own petard, so to speak, because now these very same tough gun laws that they want will be used to prosecute the president's son.
It's taken a long time for Hunter Biden cases to come up, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's taken a long time. And I think that, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And the reality is that, Joe Biden has been trading on his influence for the last 50 years in Washington, D.C., and his family, like a bunch of remoras living off of a shark, have kind of fed off of him. And that's what, Hunter Biden's essentially done. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. And you can just plainly see what's going on.
And yet Georgia was the opposite, because Georgia has moved at breakneck speed against Donald Trump. The trial's going to happen very, very quickly. How much trouble in Georgia is Trump in?
Well, it's always tough to predict what a jury or judge is going to do.
Of course, but potentially.
But this is the thing. I actually believe, once again, as a former state federal prosecutor, that I think they almost bit off too much. And because you have all these different prosecutions, like the New York prosecution, for example, where I think there's a legitimate statute of limitations issue. You're talking about a charge that had never been filed by a state prosecutor. And so they're coming up with all these new and novel theories. And I, as a prosecutor, was always taught, when you have the ability to take away someone's livelihood, life, liberty, property, it's an awesome responsibility. You don't just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And so when you're talking about a former president and the major candidate, the number one threat to the current president of the United States, you don't come up with some novel new theory that's never been tried out before.
But you, as a prosecutor, were an elected prosecutor on a Republican ticket. And we're looking at this from this side of the pond. And we would accept that our legal system isn't perfect. But we have a separation of functions. The Director of Public Prosecution's Office, interestingly, of course, Sir Keir Starmer had that job in times past. But we have a separation out from elected officials, who deal with passing legislation on criminal matters, repealing legislation. Our prosecutors are independent and seem to be independent. I just wonder, Mark Brnovich, I look at the divide in America, the political divide in America, which is, frankly, enormous. Far bigger than it's been in our lifetimes.
Yes,
maybe the biggest it's been since about 1856 in many ways. And I wonder whether these just overt political prosecutions, because that's how they look, is it time America rethought its judicial system?
Well, look, I mean, there's always room for improvement. But the reality is that before I was an elected prosecutor, I worked at the Department of Justice, where you work for, in a career track. To me, part of the problem is that you have within the agencies of the United States government, whether it's the State Department, whether it's the Department of Defense, whether it's the Department of Justice, you have these career individuals who can't be fired. They aren't getting bar complaints, and so they're really unaccountable. And they essentially have become like a Praetorian Guard. And we saw this even with Donald Trump, when all his intelligence agency directors, more than 50 of them, said this was all Russia collusion, and they're all lying.
They did not believe the Hunter Biden tape.
Right. And so you literally now you have this situation where you have an old Praetorian Guard that thinks they're the keepers of the kingdom at the FBI, at DOJ.
So basically, the unelected lot aren't working.
Yes.
The careerists aren't working, and the elected lot are acting very politically. It's a mess.
It is a mess right now, and this is the thing that worries me as a prosecutor, is that what's happening is the institutions in America are being undermined, and people aren't appreciating them as much. They don't value their credibility. And so when you have highly politicized prosecutions that seem very political in nature, people lose respect. And what's going to happen is, I worry, Nigel, this will start to cycle now, and then I think you're going to start seeing elected Republican district attorneys and attorneys general saying, well, you know what? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if they're going to attack our political appointments with novel theories...
And it's a race to the bottom.
Right. It is a race to the bottom, and as a prosecutor, you have to understand your obligation is to do justice. It's not to win at every cost.
I know. Mark Bernovich, we'll talk to you again. 2024, going to be a huge year. Now, Sharon Davis, a former Olympic swimmer, and she's really come to the fore in a different guise over the course of the last couple of years. And, she's been campaigning for the rights of women athletes, and generally, Sharon, you have stood up, and you have come into the firing line, haven't you? You and all these other awful people who say, well, women are women and men are men. But it would appear that public opinion is beginning to move in your direction.
Yes, absolutely. I think what's been hard is and it's been such an interesting night on GB News, it's all about truth, isn't it? It's all about trying to get information and facts out there. There was a time when we turned the television on and watched the news and we believed the news. And I think the sad truth is now, I'm not sure we do. And so through stealth, I think over quite a few years, gender has replaced sex. And now that we're being able to see the likes of someone like Isla Bryson, put on a pair of pink leggings and decide that they're now a woman and they want to go into a woman's prison. Or we see Leah Thomas, a 6'4", very average male swimmer, spend 1 year wearing a women's swimsuit and then go in and beat all the best American female athletes that won Olympic silver medals. It's in front of people's faces, and they're actually seeing what that really means. And it happened by stealth without people actually realizing. I think as Great Britain, we're an incredibly tolerant country. I mean, the actual, the agenda that we're looking at the moment turned around and said that we're more tolerant about sexual relationships, more tolerant about non-traditional families, abortion rights, children outside of marriage, and better respect for single parents. So actually, as a country, we're more tolerant.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. No, I agree with that, and I agree with that. And there has been a shift in attitudes. There's one potential negative here, Sharon, in this British Social Attitudes survey, and that is that the number of people who describe themselves as being prejudiced, even a little prejudiced, against transgender people has basically doubled. That is a slight cause for concern, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's partly because they feel as if they've been lied to, and instead of being able to protect, say, children's safeguarding and women's rights, they've been trampled on. So nobody wants anyone to not be able to do sport, to not be safe, to not be able to identify however they like and be comfortable in what they're wearing and what they're called. But I think that there was a collision of rights, and I think that the British public felt that for quite a long time, the rights of women and the rights of children were put second. And that is, I think, what they're now voicing. And so I'd hate that to be something that was then aimed at transgender people and became a real problem, because it absolutely must not do that.
Final thought, Sharon. Should somebody who's born a man later on be able to change their birth certificate to say they were born a woman?
Yeah, difficult one, isn't it? So I believe that sex, the actual biological sex that you are, should remain on your birth certificate. So for things like medicine, it's really important. For sport, for statistics, and for safeguarding. And I just think that, medicine, it's ridiculous, isn't it? That you can go into hospital, or that you need to have cancer screening, for example. And if you're actually biologically male, you need cancer screening for prostate. You do not need cancer screening for cervical cancer. So I think it's really important that we understand in certain realms, the actual biological sex we are really matters. And maybe that needs to say truthful on a birth certificate.
Well, Sharon Davis, right or wrong, you've been a very brave campaigner. You've taken an awful lot of stick, and thank you for coming on. Because you're winning. You're winning. Attitudes are changing.
We just want fair sport. That's all. It's really simple. We want everyone to do sport, but we want it to be fair.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. In a moment, well, he's the old Etonian who became the mercenary and attempted a coup in Equatorial Guinea. I'm looking forward to Talking Pints with Simon Mann.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
My favourite part of the show, of course, is Talking Pints. I'm joined by Simon Mann. Simon, of course, very appropriate. You're from a brewing family.
I certainly am.
And you went to Eton. And
I did.
And your father captained England at cricket.
Correct. And my grandfather.
And your grandfather.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that bit.
No, that's OK.
And you became a Scots Guards officer. I mean, you are the epitome of the British establishment, aren't you?
Not exactly.
Well, you started out that way.
I started out that way.
I can't think of a more blue blood background. But was the army always your first love, what you wanted to do?
Very much so, yeah.
And you must have been good at it.
Probably quite good.
Well, to get into the SAS, and we've had so many books written about it over the course of the last few years.
Too many.
Well, yeah, and probably people saying things they shouldn't say about operational activities, and all sorts of reality shows. You know, could you qualify for the SAS? But so what happens? Do they pick you as opposed to you picking them?
No, you volunteer.
You volunteer.
And then you have to persuade your parent regiment, because you have to come from a regiment, to go to the SAS. So you say you want to go. They probably tell you to F off.
Yeah.
Because if you're any good, they want to keep you.
Yeah.
So you have to have a bit of a sort of fight to get onto selection, and then you have to pass selection.
Which is demanding.
Yes.
You clearly were good at it, because you were there for 10 years. I mean, it's not bad, is it?
No, I wasn't in the SAS for 10 years. No, I did a troop commander's tour for 3.
Yeah.
I was in the British Army for, I think, a total of 12 years.
Okay.
I joined and left a couple of times. And thoroughly enjoyed it. And both of my sons have served in the regular army. Another son was a reservist, and the fourth son wants to join the Royal Marines.
Right, OK, so it's continuing. And how's your cricket?
Terrible. I was a wet bob. I rowed instead.
So you didn't play in the Eton Harrow match or anything like that?
None of that. No.
Well, I mean, grandfather England captain.
I know, well, exactly, but you can imagine. You can imagine how that worked. Because I was the eldest, and I was meant to be the third in a row to be the captain of England. And by the time I was 13, I realised I'm absolutely useless at it.
Now, you've done your time in the British Army and the SAS, the regiment, as they call it. And not unnaturally, you go into security. It's a pretty well-trodden path.
A well-trodden path.
Yeah. And that can take all sorts of forms, and from what I can see and what I've read, this started off in a fairly conventional way, and then there's a transition in Angola where Simon Mann goes from being a guy in charge of security to being a mercenary. What happened?
Slightly different, actually, because I'd rejoined the army in order to try and take part in the First Gulf War. Mm-hmm. And I was on the personal staff of Sir Peter de la Billière, which was a great honour, and he was a terrific general and a great boss and all of that. And then when that finally came to an end, I joined Tony Buckingham's oil and gas company, Heritage Oil and Gas, but as an oil executive. And the whole idea was I was going to reinvent myself.
Make loads of money.
Make loads of money and be an oil and gas man. Instead of which, within 6 months, I was a general in the Angolan army. So the transition had gone horribly wrong.
Fighting in what was a very bloody, horrible civil war.
Which had been going on for 30 years. Yeah. I mean, it was terrible, absolutely terrible. And we'd been attacked, and I said to Tony Buckingham, my great friend and partner in the business, the oil and gas business, I said, come on, let's attack back. Which is what we did, and that begat Executive Outcomes and their engagement in Angola. Yeah,
and you go on and you form your own company, Sandline, and you do a variety of things. And then it is just the bizarrest story. You know, the old Italian who plans a coup, in Equatorial Guinea, with funding provided by the son of Margaret Thatcher. I mean, what on earth was going on here?
Well, it seemed like a very good idea at the time.
Did it? Why?
Well, it was...
Was the president that corrupt and that bad?
It was a tyranny, and it appeared to be very bad, and it seemed like a way of sort of introducing, peace and democracy to a blighted land, and we'd all make some money.
Yeah.
And it all went horribly wrong.
So the idea was you get rid of the president that's in, you get another chap in who's a bit more friendly.
Well, a lot more friendly, because we had a chap who'd been elected the mayor of Malibu, the capital, democratically elected, and I was really his escort. Had things gone to plan.
And the objective was oil and gas?
No, it was to return the country to, a nice democratic sort of setup. We weren't going to touch the oil and gas because the Americans had ordained, do not touch the oil and gas.
But there must have been another motive. There must have been a deeper motive than just getting rid of a bad guy.
get rid of a bad guy and make a load of money and make a big difference in the region.
Yeah.
You know, because actually, had we been successful, then there would have been a knock-on effect.
It all goes wrong. I think in latter years thought that perhaps Sir Mark Thatcher's involvement wasn't particularly helpful.
Well, Mark was a friend of mine, and he came up with the money when we needed it.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be very involved. And then, of course, the wheels fell off the wagon, and I don't blame anyone for diving for cover at that point.
Okay.
Which he did.
Well, and it all turned absolutely horrendous for you, and you're in prison in Zimbabwe, in a pretty barbaric place, and people are dying, and goodness knows what is going on. And then, of course, all these famous pictures of you, and we're showing footage to our viewers now. But you finish up back in Equatorial Guinea. You're given effectively a life sentence, aren't you?
32 years, yeah.
And much of it in solitary confinement?
All my time in Equatorial Guinea was in solitary, yeah.
Which is nearly 2 years.
So I was 18 months in Equatorial Guinea. Yeah. So it's 4 years in Zim and then EG.
How does the brain survive that long in captivity, locked away in solitary? How do you stay sane, Simon Mann?
Well, I've got a sort of facetious answer, which is that the less brain you have, the easier it is.
I think you found the answer.
My schoolmasters for years have been telling me.
What was it, after boarding and eating? It wasn't all that bad.
Well, yeah, exactly. Preparation for a life of hardship.
How do you? You've got to think to yourself. You had a son that you hadn't seen.
Yeah.
You've got to think, I'm going to die here. How do you keep the mental strength to keep going? Where does it come from? Seriously.
I think some of the training really did help. I mean, obviously, I'd had the training that I had, and that helped. And I found that writing was an amazingly effective thing. But I sort of fell back on very basic things like, routine, like a guardsman. I was a guardsman.
Yeah.
The fitness, I always kept training, always trying to do something artistic, and I audited myself. And these were the methods I kind of developed.
Well, it worked.
It worked.
You got out, you got back to Blighty.
I'm more or less sane. I hope.
Not about that.
Ask Amanda.
I'm not about that. And how is life today?
Fine, lovely.
Happy?
Super children, yeah, lovely home, lovely wife.
But it is
all good.
The most extraordinary story.
But the most extraordinary part is that I'm now a friend of the president that I tried to overthrow.
No.
Yeah.
This is not possible.
It is possible.
This is almost like Ian Paisley coming together with Martin McGuinness. I mean, you really are, honestly. It's absolutely astonishing. So, advice to fellas leaving the army and going into security. Is the mercenary route a mistake?
Well, the mercenary, mercenary is a whole subject on its own.
Yeah.
And what is a mercenary, etc., etc. My glib answer to that is, do not try any of this at home.
No. OK, well, we'll close on that point. Thank you, Simon. That was good fun. Right. Back earlier in the summer, I thought I'd take a week's holiday in France. But unfortunately, on the Monday, what happened was the banking crisis that I was involved in hit the front pages. So I didn't really get a holiday at all. I'm off to Cornwall next week for a week, back with you the week afterwards, trying to catch a bluefin tuna. So I'm praying for good weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. Thursday's blustery showers will ease overnight, some drier and clearer spells, but also a cool night to come with temperatures widely in the single figures before further showers on Friday. Now, we've lost the persistent spells of rain that we saw earlier in the week, especially across western parts of the UK, but we've still got quite a number of showers circulating around an old area of low pressure that's sitting to the north of Scotland, and that means there will be further showers overnight, especially for western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales, and there'll be some showers or even some thunderstorms just running through the channel close to Kent at times overnight. But inland, actually plenty of clear spells, and under those clear spells with light winds temperatures falling into the mid to high single figures, or even the low single figures for northern parts of the UK. So a fresh start on Friday, but a bright start for many. Decent spells of sunshine across the Midlands into eastern England for a time. The bulk of the showers during the morning will be in the west. They'll move east. The odd rumble of thunder in eastern England by the afternoon. And it's a cool day compared with what we've experienced so far in September. That leads us on to a frosty start in places on Saturday. Touch of frost mid-Wales northwards in sheltered spots, but actually plenty of sunshine. And it's looking like a fair day for the vast majority. The cloud will build into the afternoon, but decent dry and bright weather lingers on. That is until Sunday, when persistent rain returns to the west, a bit warmer in the south and east.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasts,